The early hours in a Home Depot parking lot may sound ordinary, but on September 9th, 2024, it became a place of unimaginable tragedy. Newlywed Aliccia Grant, just married, sat in her car, her life moment away from being tragically cut short by someone she vowed to trust forever. A murder born from betrayal, captured in her last words, and forever imprinted in the hearts of those who loved her. Inside that red Prius, witnesses heard screams and saw Aliccia suffering from multiple stab wounds. Even as first responders tried to help, those final moments held a powerful truth. She mustered the strength to name her attacker before fading away. That naming sealed both the case and the depth of the heartbreak. Aliccia was just starting a new life, one filled with hope, family, and love. Her story wasn't meant to end this way. And yet, the media coverage, the courtroom, the crowdfunding, none of it could replace a life filled with potential. Tonight, we retrace her final steps, the shockwave her death sent through her loved ones, and the justice that followed. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video. If Aliccia Grant's story inspires you, share with someone to save lives, and subscribe to never miss cases like Aliccia's. As the investigation unfolded, it revealed painful truths about domestic violence, trust shattered, and the brutal reality that sometimes danger comes from those closest to us. This is not just another crime. It's a reminder that hearts can be broken by those we once called family. You'll meet Aliccia, glimpse the chilling scene in the Home Depot lot, feel the ripple of grief, and understand why this case both enraged and saddened the community. Stick with us, because Aliccia's life, courage, and last words demand to be heard. If we're to honor her memory, we must first see the woman before the tragedy. Aliccia Grant, 37, was a mother of two, newly married, on the brink of a fresh start. She carried herself with warmth, kindness, and a hopeful energy that made friends say she was the sort of person you lean in to be around. A married woman still navigating life with children aged 10 and 16, Aliccia's world was filled with responsibilities, love, and the dreams of safer days ahead. Her family remembers her as endlessly giving, someone whose joy lit the lives of those around her. She met and married Stephen Dennis, age 36. Freshly married, the couple was discussing annulment, signals that their relationship was already fracturing from the start. It's painful to think that the person wedding bells celebrated will become the person responsible for her loss. What makes this case gut-wrenching is the trust she placed in someone she thought loved and supported her. Trust betrayed by violence. That harsh contrast between a bride's expected new beginning and the violent end of her life is a harrowing plunge into reality. Family accounts and the GoFundMe set up for her children paint a picture of a woman deeply loved and deeply missed. They express loss not only of a person, but of the family foundation Aliccia represented. Her children now face life shaped forever by this void. Her story is tragic, but it's also a reflection of everyday love and aspirations cut short by domestic abuse. She was not famous. She wasn't a headline maker, but she was someone's mother, someone's hope, and in that, her story matters deeply. The evening that ended in tragedy began like so many others, a newlywed couple settling into their rhythm of married life. Aliccia Grant, full of warmth and optimism, had only recently said, "I do," to a man she believed she would spend forever with. Friends describe her as glowing, filled with dreams of building a home and a future together. But in the span of mere minutes, that bright promise was shattered in one of the most harrowing and public acts of violence imaginable. It was in the parking lot of Home Depot, a place many of us consider ordinary, even mundane, that the unthinkable unfolded. What should have been an errand or a quick stop turned into the stage of a nightmare. There, under the open sky, in broad daylight, Aliccia found herself face to face with a storm she could not escape. The attack was sudden and merciless. Witnesses recall the chaos erupting as a knife was pulled, the sharp glint of steel transforming an everyday moment into a scene of horror. Aliccia, just 26 years old, fought for her life as bystanders screamed and scrambled, desperately trying to process what they were seeing. But in those desperate final moments, Aliccia's thoughts were not of herself alone. With the strength of someone who knew time was slipping away, she used her voice, her last remaining weapon, to name her killer. Through gasps of pain and fading breaths, she identified her own husband as a man who had just stabbed her, ensuring that the truth would not die with her. It was a chillingly selfless act, born out of bravery and clarity in the face of unbearable pain. She knew her life was ending, yet her instinct was to protect others and to hold them accountable. Those words, her final words, would become the anchor for the investigation that followed, ensuring there could be no denial of what had been done to her. As paramedics rushed the scene, the sound of sirens piercing the air, it was already too late. Aliccia's life could not be saved. What lingered in that parking lot was a sense of disbelief, of grief that weighed heavily on the witnesses, who would never forget the sight of a young woman's life being stolen in such a brutal and senseless way. The newlywed veil she had worn only weeks before had barely settled into memory, yet she was now gone. Her dreams of family, her plans for the future, all extinguished in a matter of moments. The juxtaposition of her wedding vows and the violent betrayal she endured made the tragedy even more haunting. In the aftermath, the parking lot was cordoned off, littered with evidence markers, and stained by the violent act of a man who should have loved and protected her above all else. For those who knew her, and even for strangers who read about her story, the tragedy of Aliccia Grant's final hours was not just heartbreaking. It was a stark reminder of how quickly love, when twisted into something darker, can become deadly. The investigation began almost immediately, propelled forward by the clarity of Aliccia's final words. Police on the scene wasted no time in piecing together what had happened. Her husband, once the man who had stood before family and friends pledging eternal love, was now the prime suspect in her murder. It was an unthinkable betrayal, but one she had named with her dying breath. Detectives quickly gathered witness statements, each account painting the same grim picture. A young bride viciously attacked in broad daylight by the very person meant to protect her. Aliccia's identification of her husband as her killer gave the case a devastating but undeniable foundation. It was a rare and haunting moment. Victims rarely get the chance to name their murderer, and yet Aliccia had. Her courage gave investigators a head start they would not waste. The crime scene itself told its own story. Investigators recovered the weapon, collected forensic evidence, and documented every detail of the parking lot where Aliccia's life ended. Surveillance cameras in the area offered additional eyes on the event, confirming the timeline and supporting the testimony of those who had witnessed the attack firsthand. Step by step, the pieces of evidence fell into place, leaving little doubt about the truth.
Here he is right here. Phoenix police were first called to the parking lot of a business near Cave Creek and Thunderbird Roads. They found a woman with multiple stab wounds. She was taken to the hospital where she died. She was later identified as 37-year-old Aliccia Grant. And officers learned that her husband was Dennis. Dennis later called police where he admitted to the stabbing. He was booked into jail for second-degree murder.
But as clear as the facts were, the emotional weight of the case was staggering. Detectives spoke of the heartbreak they felt, seeing such a young life stolen so violently. They also understood the symbolic importance of Aliccia's last words, an act of bravery that not only guided her work, but would ultimately carry immense weight in court. When charges were officially filed, they carried the gravity of her betrayal. Her husband faced murder charges, the severity of which reflected not only the brutality of the act, but also the intimate betrayal that had defined it. Prosecutors leaned heavily on her last words, framing them as the most powerful testimony a victim could leave behind. The courtroom became a stage of reckoning. Jurors listened to Aliccia's loved ones describe her joy, her hope, her plans as a newlywed, before hearing the stark reality of how those dreams were ripped away. Witnesses recounted the horror of that day in the parking lot, and prosecutors reminded the court again and again it was Aliccia herself who had identified her husband as her killer. Her voice, though silence in life, echoed in the pursuit of justice. Through the investigation and trial, the weight of Aliccia's courage became clear. Her last words were more than just a cry for help. They were an act of justice, ensuring that her story would not be twisted or denied. In the end, investigators and prosecutors alike credited her bravery as the force that carried the case to its conclusion. In the wake of Aliccia's murder, her family's grief was impossible to put into words. To them, she was more than a name in a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a newlywed whose life had barely begun. When they spoke publicly, Their words carry both heartbreak and admiration. They remembered her as joyful, selfless, and filled with dreams, and they emphasized the courage she showed in her final moments. Her loved ones often said that Aliccia's strength didn't just die with her. It lived on in a way she protected herself with the truth, even at the very end. Her parents, shattered by the loss, spoke of her determination and bright spirit. They recalled childhood memories of a girl who loved to laugh, who always went out her way to make others feel included, who dreamed of building a beautiful life with a man she believed she could trust. To them, the tragedy was not just in the violence of her death, but in the betrayal that came from within her closest circle. That wound, they admitted, may never heal. Friends shared stories of Aliccia's loyalty and kindness, painting a portrait of a woman who loved deeply and gave without hesitation. Many of them gathered at vigils held in her honor, their candles glowing in the night as they shared memories of her smile, her energy, and her endless ability to lift others up. Each story carried an undercurrent of disbelief. How could someone so full of life be gone so suddenly, and at the hands of the man she had trusted most? The community, too, rallied around her memory. In Aliccia's hometown, neighbors left flowers, handwritten notes, and photos at makeshift memorials. Some who didn't know her personally still showed up at gatherings, compelled by the senselessness of her loss and united in solidarity with her grieving family. Her story became a painful reminder of the dangers of domestic violence, sparking conversations about safety, awareness, and prevention. Advocates for victims of domestic abuse seized on Aliccia's story as both heartbreaking and instructive. They spoke about the importance of recognizing warning signs and the urgent need to support those trapped in unhealthy or controlling relationships. To them, Aliccia's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a call to action for communities everywhere to do more to protect vulnerable people before it's too late. At the trial, family members delivered powerful impact statements. Their words trembled with sorrow and fury as they spoke directly about the emptiness left in their lives. One relative described Aliccia as a light extinguished too soon, while another said that her final words will haunt and inspire them forever. Each statement was more than grief. It was a demand that her story be remembered not just for the horror of her death, but for the strength she showed in the face of it. Through their pain, Aliccia's family and community made sure her life would not be reduced to a single violent act. They reminded the world of her warmth, her dreams, and her resilience. Their voices carried her memory forward, ensuring that the young bride who had the courage to name her killer would also be remembered for the love and joy she spread in her too short life. Aliccia's murder was not just an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much larger story about relationships, trust, and the dark realities of domestic violence. Her case shone a light on how quickly love can be twisted into control, manipulation, and ultimately violence. It left many people asking how such devastation could unfold in what should have been the happiest season of her life, just weeks into her marriage. The contrast between her dreams of a future and the horror of her death became a haunting reminder that abuse can lurk behind even the most beautiful facades. One of the most striking themes in Aliccia's story is betrayal. The idea that the person you vow to spend your life with, the one meant to protect and cherish you, could instead orchestrate your destruction, shakes the very foundation of trust. Her final words, naming her own husband as her attacker, spoke volumes about the betrayal she endured. It forced society to confront uncomfortable truths. Sometimes the danger comes not from strangers, but from those closest to us. Her case also brought into focus the importance of listening to survivors and recognizing subtle red flags. Many experts say that patterns of emotional abuse, financial control, or sudden isolation are often precursors to violence. For Aliccia, the world may never know all the details of what she endured in the short time of her marriage, but her death became a symbol of why no warning sign should ever be dismissed. The community's reaction underscored another theme: the responsibility society carries in supporting victims of domestic abuse. Too often, people feel trapped in silence, unsure where to turn or whether they will be believed. Aliccia's murder reignited calls for stronger resources, shelters, hotlines, counseling services that give people a lifeline when home is no longer safe. Her story became a catalyst for conversations that extended beyond her circle of loved ones. There's also the theme of resilience. Though Aliccia's life was taken, her courage in her final moments became her lasting legacy. By identifying her killer, she not only brought justice to herself, but also gave other survivors a voice. Her story demonstrates that even in the face of unimaginable violence, victims can still assert their truth, and that truth can change everything. In reflecting on her case, many pointed out the need for education and awareness, especially among young couples. Love can be intoxicating, and commitment can feel like security. But Aliccia's story reminds us that no one is immune to manipulation or harm. By openly discussing these cases, society takes a step toward preventing similar tragedies, equipping people with the knowledge to recognize unhealthy dynamics before they escalate. Ultimately, Aliccia's death was a personal tragedy, but its broader significance lies in what it teaches us about love, trust, and the hidden dangers of domestic violence. Her story urges us not just to mourn, but to act, to listen more closely, to advocate more fiercely, and create a world where no bride, daughter, or friend has to use her final words to identify her killer. When tragedies like Aliccia's happen, it's natural to feel overwhelmed by grief and even helplessness. But her story also serves as a call to action, a reminder that we are not powerless in the face of violence. Each of us can play a role, whether through awareness, advocacy, or support for survivors in our communities. The first step is simple: talk about it. Sharing Aliccia's story ensures her life is remembered not only for its tragic ending, but for the important lessons it carries about love, safety, and vigilance. Communities can also honor Aliccia by strengthening the resources available to those in danger. Domestic violence hotlines, crisis centers, and advocacy organizations are often underfunded and overwhelmed, yet they provide critical lifelines to people who feel trapped. Supporting these organizations, through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading awareness, means more people will have somewhere to turn before it's too late. Aliccia's case reminds us that prevention is not just about laws and courtrooms, but about accessible support in everyday life. Another powerful way to respond is through education. Schools, community centers, and faith groups can host workshops that teach young people about healthy relationships, boundaries, and warning signs of abuse. If these conversations had been normalized earlier, perhaps Aliccia's story could have ended differently. Creating safe spaces for open dialogue helps dismantle the silence and stigma that so often surrounds domestic violence. On a personal level, supporting survivors starts with listening. Too many people hesitate to share their fears because they're afraid of being dismissed, judged, or blamed. If someone confides in you about their partner's behavior, believe them, validate their experience, and gently guide them toward resources. A single moment of compassion can mean the difference between someone staying in silence and finding the courage to seek safety. In Aliccia's case, her courage in naming her husband as her attacker in her final moments was her ultimate act of strength. But no one should have to be in that position to be believed. Her story challenges us to create an environment where survivors don't have to fight for their truth to be heard. Belief and support should come long before the point of tragedy. Community leaders and policymakers also carry responsibility. Stronger legal protections, swifter law enforcement responses, and harsher penalties for abusers can act as deterrents while reinforcing the message that domestic violence will not be tolerated. Aliccia's murder underscores the urgency of laws that prioritize victims' safety and hold perpetrators accountable before escalation turns deadly. But beyond laws and systems, it's about building a culture of care. Neighbors checking in, co-workers noticing changes, friends asking hard but loving questions. These small acts of attentiveness weave a safety net that can catch someone before they fall too far. When we treat every life as valuable, we prevent more stories like Aliccia's from being written in tragedy. Finally, as viewers and members of a wider audience, we can transform grief into momentum. If you've been moved by Aliccia's story, don't let it stop here. Share this story, start conversations, and help spread awareness. And if you or someone you know is struggling with domestic violence, know that help is available. By taking action, by standing together, we not only honor Aliccia's memory, but work toward building a safer future where love is never confused with harm. As we reflect on Aliccia Grant's story, one thing becomes heartbreakingly clear. Love should never cost you your life. Her journey from newlywed joy to unimaginable tragedy reminds us just how fragile safety can be when trust is broken. In those fleeting months of marriage, she likely carried all the hopes and dreams of building a life with someone she thought she knew. Instead, Her life was cut short in a way no one should ever endure. Her final words, naming her husband as her killer, echo like a haunting reminder of her strength and clarity even in her last breath. In that moment, she wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter who refused to let her story be silenced. That courage ensured that justice could begin its course, even as she slipped away. It's an act that should forever be remembered as part of her legacy. But beyond the crime scene, the courtroom, and the headlines, there was a woman, bright, kind, and deeply loved. Aliccia was not just the subject of a tragic story. She was a daughter, a friend, and a loved one whose absence leaves an irreplaceable void. When we speak her name, we honor the fullness of her humanity, not just the manner in which her life ended. Her murder also leaves us with questions that weigh heavy on the heart. How could this have been prevented? What signs might have been overlooked? And how many others, like Aliccia, are silently enduring abuse, hoping for change, while their lives hang in the balance? These questions don't have easy answers, but they demand that we as a society keep asking them. In every tragedy, there is also a mirror. Aliccia's story reflects the cracks in our systems, the silence in our communities, and the fear that holds too many people hostage in unsafe relationships. But it also reflects resilience. The resilience of families who fight for justice, communities that come together, and advocates who refuse to let these stories fade away. We must remember that healing is not just for Aliccia's family, but for every community touched by domestic violence. Healing comes when survivors feel safe to step forward, when families are supported in their grief, and when society collectively refuses to normalize or excuse abusive behavior. Healing is possible, but it requires all of us. Aliccia's life, though tragically short, carries a lasting impact. She reminds us to cherish our loved ones, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to build environments where safety is a right, not a privilege. Her story may be marked by violence, but it should also be remembered for the lessons it teaches us about courage, awareness, and the importance of love that truly nurtures. As this story closes, let us hold Aliccia's memory in our hearts, not as just another name in a tragic headline, but as a life that mattered deeply. May her legacy inspire us to create safer homes, stronger communities, and more compassionate systems that protect rather than fail. And to you, the viewer, if this story moved you, let it be more than just a story you heard today. Let it be a spark that inspires awareness, kindness, and action in your own circles. Share what you've learned. Look out for people around you, and stand with those who may not yet have found their voice. Finally, we ask you to keep Aliccia's story alive by joining us in this mission. Like this video, share with others, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so more stories like hers are told. Not for sensationalism, but to shine a light where it's needed most. Together, through awareness and action, we can honor Aliccia's memory and work toward a future where stories like hers no longer need to be told.